talk about America's second bank. America's had three banks, three national banks. There was the first Bank of the United States, second Bank of the United States, and then the Federal Reserve. In some respects, the independent treasury under Martin Van Buren was a kind of bank, too. So what are we going to do without a bank? Well, let's just make the treasury independent. Well, okay, well, that's kind of like a bank anyways, isn't it? So the second Bank of the United States had a shit ton of power. The second Bank of the U.S., they were buying a bunch of politicians left and right, speculating, spending lots of money, making sure the 1% of the elite just had all the liquidity in the world. Just like today, the second Bank of the United States had lots of power. It had a 20-year charter, chartered in 1816, set to expire 1836, which would have been the end of Andrew Jackson's term. Andrew Jackson hated the bank, but Henry Clay thought that it would be smart to throw it up in the election year of 1832 because clearly it would be an unpopular issue, but Henry Clay, held steadfast. He'd rather be right than to be president. Well, he wasn't either. He wasn't right, nor was he president. You had Biddle, that fucking Nicholas Biddle fucked America over, so Nicholas Biddle is the one who's going to run the second Bank of the United States. And I'm going to talk more about what Nicholas Biddle is going to do in detail, but in short, long story short, Nicholas Biddle went ahead and crashed the economy. He's the president of the bank. Andrew Jackson's talking about getting rid of the bank because they're a bunch of corruptionist, pieces of shit, only care about the rich and all that. And here Nicholas Biddle says, well, in order to prove to the country, to the politicians, to all these damn, the people of America and Congress and the president, I'm going to show all you sons of bitches, and he crashes the economy. He calls all the loans. Everybody needs to make their payments, raises interest rates, cuts discounts. Did anything and everything to tighten, to contract the money, money supply, to fuck everybody over in order to say, see, you guys needed me, didn't you? Yeah, see what happened when, I wasn't around, you guys got fucked, right? You got fucking screwed, and it worked at first, but in the long run, all he did was just prove Andrew Jackson's case. It just shows you how the reactionaries are. Anytime there's a progressive idea, there's always these reactionaries that come up and they say, no, let's stay back and hold, true to tradition and let's go backwards and let's just keep on, denigrating into, whittling into a bunch of goddamn white trash pellets on a dirty sidewalk. Anyway, second Bank of the U.S. had lots of power, 20-year charter. They had the exclusive right to control the national banking. Who controls America's banks and the banking system? The second bank, Nicholas Biddle, did. And had as many branches and independent charters as they wanted. Kind of like today, but we have 12 permanent regional banks. So we got the Fed, right? That's the third bank. And they're the same thing. They're both private. They're private. So the Fed, the second Bank of the United States, was a private corporation. Private corporations, so they can make as much money as they could possibly want. They got stockholders, so they got to make sure their stockholders are getting a fat dividend, make sure they're making profits, just skimming off the top of the people. And who are they profiting off of? All the American people and our resources and all of our services and goods. Fantastic. So private corporation with the public mandate. This is the second Bank of the U.S. and it's the Fed. It's the exact same thing. The Fed's different in terms of instead of there just being, the second Bank of the U.S. and then they could just branch out however they want to. The Fed is the central main, in D.C., you have the Fed Board of Governors, who's the central main bank of the U.S., but there's 12 permanent regional banks all over the place. And then those regional banks can have their own branches. But that's, Woodrow Wilson was talking about decentralizing the Fed with the 12 regional banks. So it's not just D.C., but, 12 different regional banks who are making the decisions. So it's slightly more decentralized. And that's it. The second Bank of the U.S.'s goal is to stabilize the U.S. economy with a uniform currency, which is interesting because I don't think they had paper dollars. The Continental failed, and then this is before the U.S. demand note of Abraham Lincoln. And so they have to stabilize a uniform currency of silver and gold. We got to make sure silver and gold is not, so just print out, coins, silver and gold coins, and just say this is the value of silver and gold. Print out a whole bunch of them. Silver and gold is money, and it's a precious metal. We just have, paper money is inflationary. It's just backed by, the ink and the fancy cotton and fiber linens that they use. Well, that's some fancy cotton. Look at that cotton that they use to make that paper dollar. Oh, shit, I'm going to... sure, it's $100. You say it's $100, that's pretty enough for me. That's a pretty... I'll give you... All right, I'll pretend it's $100 with you. And it strengthens the federal government, if that's a fucking reason never to do anything. Hey, we need to make the government more strong. Give them a bank. No, we need to make the government less. They need to be strong in their restrictions of, of not imposing their will upon us. They need to make sure that we are liberated and free, not just from the federal government, but from state governments too, right? We have all these freedoms in America, so we can do whatever we want, right? All these freedoms in America, 74 freedoms total. Isn't that awesome? So the Fed is a private corporation with a public mandate. So it's government-initiated, government, around, government-designated, government-chartered, but it's private. The Fed... The board of directors are chosen by the member banks, and the president of the Dirty Dozen regional Fed banks are chosen by those board of directors. So the banks pick the board of directors pick the president. This is privately owned. Anytime they have any trouble, they want to hide themselves from accountability, they say they're a private corporation. A government entity when they want some free money, right? But if somebody says, hey, you're supposed to represent us, no, we're not supposed to. We don't have to do shit. We got some stockholders. We got to pay dividends, and the stockholders are usually the bank owners. So you got member banks and the bank owners. So the banks, this is the banking class. This is like half, 50%, 38% of the 9,000 banks in America belong to the Federal Reserve System. And the Fed picks like some, token regular folks, like university presidents, right? Regular old working class, Joe the plumbers, like university presidents, ex-CEOs. The vast majority chosen by the banks themselves. So the banks are in control. The Fed is a private corporation. It's a private corporation. When, in court, whenever they want to hide from accountants, they don't want to be accountable, so they'll still, we're a private corporation. We're just trying to make money for ourselves. We don't have to be accountable to the public, so we fuck the public. Who cares? We're a private corporation. We were only here to make money for the private. Yeah, we got a public mandate, but what, you expected the bankers and the moneyed class to actually give a shit about the American people? That's the whole reason the Federal Reserve excludes the American people. We don't have bank accounts in the Federal Reserve System. It's our central bank, but the American citizen doesn't have an account with the Federal Reserve. I think that'd be fantastic, but no democratic legitimacy. Nobody's elected. All these people are just chosen behind fucking closed doors by a bunch of rich assholes. So Andrew Jackson's peeps are sitting there saying that the second bank of the United States, which is, seeming to be pretty identical to the Fed, favored the merchants and the speculators, the businessmen, the corporations at the expense of the farmers and the artisans. People are saying that the Bank of the United States are using public money for risky gambling ventures, buying junk bonds and mortgage-backed security, derivatives, credit default swaps, and treasuries. Always got to invest in those treasury bonds. Aren't treasury bonds? That's just money, right? Treasury bonds is money. Oh, sure. Whatever people can convince you of money, that's all they got to do. If they can convince you it's money and you think it is. So the Second Bank of America is interfering in politics, giving economic privileges to a small group of stockholders and financial elites. Jesus Christ. This is all today. All this is relevant today. Andrew Jackson is a racist piece of shit, but what he did with the bank is fantastic. This is for the working class. So, the Second Bank of the United States didn't believe in the principle of equal opportunity. Some people are saying the public and private designation is unconstitutional. And of course, obviously, the national bank charter, it gives more power to the federal government, meaning it violates state sovereignty. So state sovereignty, if they steal your copyright, They can, invoke state sovereignty today with the Supreme Court. But if the bank, the Fed, people says it's unconstitutional, does state sovereignty uphold? Well, I bet the Supreme Court are a bunch of fucking wimps and they go against the powerless day in and day out. I bet you that's what. So just prior to the 1832 election, so they threw the second bank, the United States. This is going to be the main issue of the day. We're all talking about the banks and money, and Andrew Jackson had a famous quote about if the American people, I'm paraphrasing, but something, if the American people understood the financial system and the money system and the banking industry, there would be a revolution before morning. So that's true today. If the American people understood their financial system, there would be a revolution before morning, but they need to obfuscate the, truth, so they don't know what's actually going on. But, when it comes to Andrew Jackson's a racist piece of shit, but you got to give him credit where credit's due. He's, defending the common white man, the planters, the farmers, the mechanics, and the laborer. He didn't give a shit about black folks, put them in slavery. Brown folks, put them in concentration camps in Oklahoma. Made sure that kicked them out of Georgia, kicked them out of Alabama, kicked them out of Kentucky, kicked them out of Florida, kicked them out of wherever he could kick them. Make sure they get, past the Mississippi. Let these white people take all this land. They got all these slaves, and they need land and plantations. But when it comes to the Bank of the United States, it was corrupt. It was spending a shit ton of money. Nicholas Biddle was a piece of shit. It was for the moneyed and the rich class. It wasn't fighting for the farmers, mechanics, laborers, and the planters. It was for the moneyed interest, for the 1%, the financiers, and the fiduciary, the Mr. and Mrs. Fiduciary. So 1832, all anybody talked about was about the Bank of the United States and also the nullification crisis in South Carolina. That nullification, so South Carolina was being a bunch of assholes, right? So, they voted for Joe Biden. They're the ones that got Joe Biden in there. Fuck Bernie Sanders over. Thanks a lot, South Carolina. Jesus Christ, still being a bunch of assholes, carrying that, great tradition on today. But Andrew Jackson said, South Carolina, you ain't got no states' rights. Fuck you, South Carolina, motherfuckers. Get back in line. Pay your damn tariffs. I told you to pay your taxes. You didn't pay. And they got back in line. So Andrew Jackson, people say that with the Civil War, it'd be interesting. He was all about slaves and slavery, but he was also all about the Union. So, expansion of American executive power. This is Andrew Jackson, because he smashed the Second Bank of America, which... who else besides an Andrew Jackson could have smashed the Bank of America? Who else but an Andrew Jackson? You had to have you had to have the president do it. This was absolutely, Andrew Jackson was 100% right with this. He believed that the executive branch could essentially do as it pleases as long as they were working for the best interest of the American people. As long as the executive branch says, I believe that doing A, B, and C, shutting down the Bank of America is for the best interest of the American people, then that's totally fine and dandy. That's totally okay. Andrew Jackson thought the bank was unconstitutional. The Supreme Court disagreed. But Andrew Jackson said that SCOTUS couldn't decide that. He basically said it's all about the executive branch. Supreme Court, you need the consent from the people in the states. You can't just pass law, Supreme Court. So basically he says they didn't have the power of judicial review. He vetoed the bank, not just on the constitutionality of it, but because he believed it to be in the best interest of the American people. So he expanded the power of the presidency. Fuck you, legislative branch. Fuck you, judicial branch. The executive's going to do the fuck as it pleases, and it says that this goddamn Second Bank of the United States is a bunch of bullshit and needs to be destroyed. So, the way Andrew Jackson understood the Second Bank of America, he's the executive, he's the, commander-in-chief, he's the head honcho, he's the, decider, and so merely an instrument. He thought that the bank was just an instrument of the executive branch acting through the Treasury Department. And he did have a simple deposit idea to stabilize the national currency, gold and silver. He was going to use the state banks. So just put, the money, $10 million, he takes $10 million out of the Second Bank of the United States, and he redeposits that money into the state banks. And the Nicholas Biddle, he's a piece of shit, he induces a panic, but he also keeps the Bank of America going even though there is no, money from the United States. The United States has pulled out. There is no money. They have no confidence in it, so therefore he's just, got a bunch of other rich people's money and shit. So what are you going to do now? So he became, he was a private corporation to begin with a public mandate. Now he changed to a private corporation with just private mandates, and he was just going to fight for his stockholders and his rich, capitalist cronies. And eventually, 1841, after the chart, so it didn't get renewed, it didn't get the recharter or whatever, but it took about 5 years before it finally failed. So it did fail, but, on its own accord, because, just taking out American dollars. Well, what about the other things they invested in? They had silver and gold in their coffers, so he had a shit ton of money, in his pockets. Now, Andrew Jackson was saying, fuck the three branches, this is for the American people, so fuck the bank. And so he just went ahead and pulled the funds out of it. The House and the Senate censored him, and then the House, they said he could do it, but you got, so anyways. Last but not least, Andrew Jackson said the federal government, the true strength consists in leaving individuals and states as much as possible to themselves. National bank kills states' rights and state sovereignty. Makes me think of, I think Thomas Jefferson, the best government is the government which governs least or not at all, right? So the true strength of the federal government is we're going to leave the individual American citizens and the American states as much as to themselves as possible. So that's why he killed the National Bank, right? The National Bank was against the people, it was against the states, so fuck the National Bank. It was against America. And so he was right. Andrew Jackson was proven right because Nicholas Biddle tried to fuck America over by inducing a panic. So, the reactionaries, oh shit, we're going to shut down the Bank of America, I'll show you, and I'll collapse your economy, and you'll clamor for me to be your savior. But he collapsed the economy, so they said, what the fuck, Nicholas Biddle, you piece of shit? You just fucked us all over, you just fucked us all. Why did you fuck us all like that? So the third Bank of America, the Fed, they're a little smarter. They're printing money up, they're making sure everybody gets, a little grease in their palms, get a little, taste of the trough. Some people get more than others, but when they're printing up free money, they make sure everybody gets enough people that, gets a little taste, not completely satiated, but they get, they get their whistle wet. So the congressional investigation had said that the Second Bank of America was okay, and, by close votes, and so Andrew Jackson's just like, fuck this shit. By executive order, I'm going to take $10 million out of the second U.S. bank, give it to the state banks, and then that's all she wrote. Then, the Bank of the United States might have had the name, but they didn't have the money or the backing or the confidence of the U.S. government. And for the next, this was 1841 till 50 years, 60, 70 years, till 1913 before the Fed established itself. The United States had no official bank. The Martin Van Buren, right after Andrew Jackson, is going to make the Treasury Department independent, and so it kind of acted like a bank. So I wonder if that, the independent Treasury turned out to be a decent system, because it's already, the government. So it's like, anyway, so. Last but not least, Andrew Jackson said that if 2/3 of the Senate overrode his veto of the bank recharter, he'd resign from the presidency and return to the Hermitage. Andrew Jackson is going to say even later on that he considered, giving the bank their charter. Shit, maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I should just give the bank its charter. And then he's like, well, maybe we actually just need a bank, right? We need a central bank, so maybe we should just start a brand new one. But then Andrew Jackson was like, well, shit, let's just see my experiment, right? I've done smashed banks. I give it to the state banks. It's all silver and gold, so it's all pretty consistent. You got silver, you got gold, then you ain't got no money. You're getting paper currency from the state banks. You better be goddamn careful with that shit. So, let's give this experiment a chance. And there's actually some arguments. Some people say there's a panic of the 1837, but I've read some economists, and just a side note, just to throw it out there, but other economists have said actually there was growth. There was growth in productivity, more wages, more jobs, more businesses, and so therefore more GDP, so therefore the economy was actually doing good. after the closing of the Second United States Bank of America. I don't know. I mean, the official version of history, there's a panic in 1837, and it had a lot to do with this, but Biddle, tanked the economy on purpose, so maybe his induced panic turned into a depression. Long term, people are like, shit, these damn rich motherfuckers who's leading our country can just manipulate this shit whenever they feel like it and fuck us all over. So for 7 years there was a recession. There's the official version of the 1837 panic, but I believe that there's the cotton prices. It was a worldwide depression. Cotton prices just tanked. Everybody had too much cotton. Cotton was just, cotton wasn't king anymore. Cotton was just, there was too much cotton. And so the cotton prices dropping had a lot to do with it. Bank of America or Bank of England raised their rates and some other shit. But I think the cotton prices and some other stuff, I'll, take a closer look at the panic of 1837, because right now with the, panic, the recession, lockdown of 2020, the coronavirus thing, I think it's good to look at all these panics and depressions. You know that the Great Depression wasn't the first Great Depression. There was another depression in American history where they said, that's a Great Depression, okay? So that should be, the Great Depression should actually be called the Second Great Depression. So, I mean, historians, I think, we need to update the historians because I'm not for sure if they've actually, collected, like the world wars. We had like 4 or 5 French and Indian wars before the final French and Indian War. And they were world wars because there was just, nations from all over the world that was participating in them. So for his part, Andrew Jackson did consider maybe we should keep the bank. If we don't have the bank, maybe we should start a brand new one. But he's like, fuck it, I already got here, right? I got you guys here. I got rid of your all's bank, okay? And, yeah, I mean, fuck the banks. I can't stand banks myself. So, Andrew Jackson, that atrocious saint, he's a piece of shit. But when it comes to the fucking bank, he's right. And even if, they would have rechartered or started a brand new one, what incentive, what motivation does the bank have to just be honest on their own accord? Unless you're going to revoke their charter, unless you're going to dissolve them, unless you're going to pull an Andrew Jackson, pull the fucking plug on them. That's how power works. People want to act like they know how power works. Okay, well, what power do we have over the Fed? As American people, we have our representatives don't have power over the Fed. So we ain't got no goddamn power. We don't even have an account with the Fed. So when they're printing up $4.5 trillion, who do you think is, it's everybody that's part of the damn Federal Reserve System, the 125 people that run the system, the board of directors, the presidents, the board of governors, and FOMIC, right? Anyways, it's 1 minute after noon, Sunday, April 19th, 2020. I'm John Masters out of Castillo County in the Louvetti, here in the Louvetti in Castillo County, Southern Colorado, USA, Milky Way, galaxy, universe, and probably little marbles with aliens, like Men in Black. Anyways, peace.